we've been speaking about the representation of good and evil is this counterforce. Evil is only a result of lack of good. If God withdraws, then it leaves a vacuum for evil. Evil brings about what we call regression, this damage. In the human body, if sometimes a limb atrophies, it could be rehabilitated. What happens if it atrophies to a point where the limb deteriorates? Once that limb deteriorates, it cannot be rehabilitated. So he says something interesting. The ultimate objective is the world should achieve a level of perfection. So as much as evil may reign at any time in the history of this world, whether it's the destruction of the first and second temple, whether it's the Holocaust, which is a public desecration of God's name, whatever level that evil tries to snuff out every vestige of Kedusha, of holiness, although it looks as if it's beyond return, it cannot be regained its footing, it's not the reality. Whatever damage or regression takes place in existence, it's only to the point where it could be brought back. It's never a point where it cannot be brought back. He gives the example. The opened level of what? Of desolation, of non-return would be what? Death. When the soul leaves the body, he says, is like inanimate stone. Then it deteriorates, reverts back to dust. So he'd say it's beyond rehabilitation. It cannot return. Because the result of that decomposition is that there's no trace of life. There's no indication that that entity ever had life in it. You have the human body, you say, well, the body had the soul in it initially. But once it deteriorates and decomposes to a point where it's dust, there's no trace of its original existence. And what happens when that dust intermingles with the earth itself? Literally, it's like at a microscopic level. It's not noticed. The past is gone. No. The remains of that body, although it decomposed, and there's no more extreme level of destruction, there's going to be resurrection. That body will be resurrected because God only allows things to deteriorate and regress to a point where they could be brought back. So as much as evil may reign supreme in the world, it will never be the point that could actually annihilate and vaporize good. It's only to the point of a setback, a regression, but whatever that regression is, it can always be rehabilitated. It can always be brought back. And therefore, at the end of time, when God is ready to infuse this world with his presence, and those who are worthy of resurrection will be resurrected, the world will reach its perfect state. Because as much as it's imperfect, it's never at a point of what? Of deterioration, decomposition, where it cannot not return any longer. And he says the ultimate proof is what? Is resurrection, is Tchias HaMesim. That's the ultimate model of this concept. He says it's interesting. When you plant a seed in the ground, what happens? It rots, it deteriorates to a point where that seed no longer exists as a seed. And all its characteristics of the seed are totally obliterated. But yet, in that soil, there's something as a result of a remnant of that seed which germinates. That's the germination process. All of a sudden starts sprouting. Because there's nothing in existence that exists which ultimately will not come back, except for evil. Why? Because evil was never meant to be forever. Good was meant to be forever. because that's the objective of creation. Evil is only to create the challenge to be the counterforce for good. Once there's no longer, as we said many times, there's no longer need for that evil to create the setting of choice. Evil is not meant to be, so ultimately there will no longer be evil, not a trace of evil, never to be brought back. But since good was meant to be for always, so even when good takes the back seat or recedes to a point of non-noticeability, doesn't make a difference. It will come back. Because good was made to always be, except it regresses and it seems to be into the oblivion, but it's not the reality. So whatever damage is caused by the evil to the good, which we say is damage to existence, it really becomes putrefied. That putrefaction is only a temporary situation. Now, this existence, the physical existence, this world, it was never meant to be forever. So the putrefaction of this world, it will not be rehabilitated. The human being will be rehabilitated. The Jew will be rehabilitated. But the world itself, which was not to be eternal, the physical world, this world, God will create a new world. The Jew, the body of the Jew, it only regressed to a point only to be able to be brought back. Where do we have something similar to resurrection in the history of the Jewish people? I've mentioned many times, I asked the question, we find in the 40th year of the desert, when Miriam passed away, the wellspring just dried up. Because the Talmud tells us that the wellspring was the merit of Miriam. So when she died, the Jews started to complain to Moshe, and they asked disrespectfully for the water. They were rebellious. And Moshe became angry and upset. And this is, instead of talking to the rock, speaking to the rock, he struck the rock. Okay? The water gushed forth to water the people, to water the flocks, to water the herds. And the Torah goes out its way that God provided water for not only for the people, for Esbeiram, even for the livestock. So Rashi immediately makes a point, which is the Midrash. It should say God provided water, whatever water is needed. But you know something? If the Torah goes out of its way to say it's for its livestock, it shows that not only is God concerned for the welfare of the Jewish people in terms of their existence, but even their possessions, the herds and the flocks, God even provided water for them, which is an enormous amount of water. To say to God does really make a difference. More water, less water, it's all the same. But the Torah goes out of its way to teach us God is concerned not only for the people themselves, but even for their financial status. He provided water even for the flocks and herd that they shouldn't die of thirst, because then the Jews will be financially depleted. So we see the chesed of Hashem, God's kindness. Not only did he provide water for the people, he provided water even for the livestock. So I asked the question, until the wellspring dried up, the Jews left Egypt with tremendous herds and flocks and livestock when they left Egypt. Initially, there was no water. The Jews complained. God says to Moshe, strike the rock, they're going to have water. So for the past 40 years, up to 39 years, what did the Jews drink and what did they give to their flocks and their herds? The water from their wellspring. Right? Correct? So why does the Torah only go out of its way to reveal that the water was not only sufficient for the people, even for the livestock? I mean, God's been providing all the years for the livestock. It's not only for the people, it's the livestock. Proof of the pudding is, after 40 years, they had flocks and livestock. Tremendous numbers. How did they survive without water? It's evident. God did provide the water. So what are we bringing proof in the 40th year that God is concerned for the possessions of the Jews? from day one, you see he's concerned. There was a miracle. The rock gave forth water, enough water for what? Not only for the people, even for their possessions. So from there, we should have shown immediately God is concerned for the financial welfare, stability of the Jewish people. That's a question I asked. So what I said was, and it's based on a Shalom Kodesh, who was a Kabbalist, 18th century Kabbalist. He writes that when we left Egypt and we began the ascent to Sinai, spiritually speaking, it was the equivalent of the beginning of a new existence. Because we were in formation, evolving to become a Jewish people, which never existed before. Therefore, it's the equivalent of the beginning of creation. When God created the world, he created the world with all its amenities. Whatever's needed for man to live, provided. Whether man is evil, whether he's good, whether he's middle of the road, God provides. Because you can't have a world unless he provides. When we left Egypt, that God provided for us, it's not because he's chosal maman, because he's concerned for our welfare. If our exit from Egypt, Exodus, which is the beginning of descent to Sinai, is the equivalent of creation, so of course he provided water. The world itself can't exist unless it has water. To feed, to water, whatever needs water. Therefore, there wouldn't be a proof from there. Because that's the beginning of creation. What about in the 40th year? We've been around for a while. Now the water ceases. We're ready, creation has taken place. Now you need a miracle to bring something in back to provide water. To provide enough water just for the people. Why even for their cattle and their livestock and their flocks? The answer is from there we see that God is concerned for the financial welfare of the Jews, not only for their physical welfare, for their own being, that you should be alive, but even for the life of their of their herds and their flocks. Therefore, it's a proof from after 40 years. From when we left Egypt, there's no proof from there. Because when God created the world, he created the world with all the amenities which the world needs to function as a world. That's what I said. Now, when the Jews left Egypt, we're at the 49th level of impurity. For all intents and purposes, spiritually, we were dead. What Yaakov went to Egypt with his 70 individuals of his family. They were vibrant, thriving spiritual beings. When we left Egypt, we were beyond comatose. Literally, there was no trace of holiness in us. Our souls were non-functional. What happened when we left Egypt? That sub-particle of spirituality all of a sudden started to flicker. And then it started to grow. It became a flame, a torch, an inferno. That was on day 50 when we stood at Sinai. So what is the equivalent of resurrection? Resurrection, when we left Egypt for all intents and purposes, although it wasn't a physical resurrection, it was a spiritual resurrection. So the concept of what? Anything going into the oblivion, that's only terminology we use. It appears as if it went into the oblivion. But in reality, the only thing that will go into the oblivion is evil. Because evil only exists to what? To facilitate good. But once the good has reached that level where it no longer has to be accommodated, evil comes to an end. But good, the world was created for the sake of good. So although it seemingly goes into the oblivion and seems to be non-existence, it exists. It's like the seed germinating, rotting to a non-existent state, and all of a sudden begins sprouting. Because there is a trace of whatever that is, which is rejuvenated, and that's the beginning of growth. But I'm saying an example of Tchias HaMesim resurrection is leaving Egypt. And 50 days later, we accept the Torah unequivocally from God. And we achieve a level, not only are we spiritual beings, we're physical beings or eternal, because if not for the sin of the golden calf, death had no relevance to the Jewish people any longer. To that degree. The resurrection then was the resurrection which ultimately is to take place at the end of time. The last of the 13 tenets of Jewish belief is resurrection. Reward, punishment, resurrection. Now, if you don't believe in resurrection, you have no share in the world to come. That's how fundamental it is to Jewish belief. Now, the way we're explaining it, so the way we explained in the past was because in every decision a human being makes, not only is the soul involved in that initiative, the body is also. So God can't only reward the soul and not the body, right? We have struggles. You're hungry, you don't sleep, you're tortured. You allow yourself to be deprived for the sake of the mitzvah. Yom Kippur, we fast. We afflict ourselves. We don't eat, we don't drink. So what? That's only a spirit, that's only the soul. It's the body also. So how does God reward only the soul, not the body? Therefore, ultimately, the body has to be resurrected, re-infused with the soul. This new being is for all eternity. That's the concept. But resurrection, what does it indicate? It tells us the objective, as they say, in hindsight is 20/20. In retrospect, everything's very clear. All the pieces fall into place. At the end of time, we'll realize that good was meant to be forever. And evil was only a temporary situation to facilitate the good, because otherwise there wouldn't be a context of choice. But we'll only know that and see that factually at the end of time, because all that's going to exist at the end of time is only good. And the good that seemed to have gone into the oblivion all of a sudden is rejuvenated. And how? Through resurrection. Now those who lived within the context of good, they're part of eternity. The people who lived as evil, they go into the oblivion, never to return. The last chapter in Sanhedrin, which is one of the tractates, it's called Chelek. Chelek means portion. And it begins, Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek l'olam habo. Every Jew has a share in the world to come. That's why the chapter is called Chelek. Every Jew has a share in the world to come. And over there, it mentions that resurrection is one of the prerequisites that to give you your share in the world to come. And then the Gemara, the Talmud starts discussing where do we see resurrection alluded to anywhere in the Torah. It cites 13 sources. Could you imagine? Usually Talmud asks a question, how do you know this? What's the source? They'll bring one source, two sources, three sources, 13 sources. And it's reconfirmed and reiterated and resecured that it reaches the point that it's irrefutable beyond refutation. Cannot be, that's how it's authenticated. Why are we hammering away at this? Why is it so important to know this? It's such a fundamental. Because what is it all about? They say, we say seeing is believing. Seeing is believing. But what we see may not be reality. And many things we see is not reality. A person dies, unless we know from God that he's coming back, nobody comes back. Nobody comes back from the dead. If he comes back from the dead, that means he never died. But if he died, he doesn't come back. And if he died, you have all these stories. People, they saw the light, they saw the world to come, they came back. Even that's true. But the person never left long enough that he was not meant to come back. It was a slight detachment. But if a person's detached on a permanent level, he's not coming back. See, he's buried. He's been interred for the past 1,000 years. Seeing's believing. This man has decomposed. We did carbon testing on his thumbnail. This is prehistoric man. That's what science says. This is the Homo sapien, or whatever they call them, the early, the earlier, whatever they talk about. These are all the people that, man comes from monkey, from the ape. So if seeing is believing, if factually what you see is correct, you see accurately. But if you don't see accurately, what you may believe you're seeing, you're not seeing reality. If you see distortion, they used to have, you went to it was called a freak show. You go and you went into this building, you have mirrors, and either you look stretched vertically, horizontally, inflated. It depends what kind of mirror you're looking in. They used to say smoke and mirrors. It's all smoke and mirrors. But I see it. You see nothing. It's all figments of what you believe to be reality. It's not reality. Proof in the pudding, resurrection. But what does resurrection prove? That anything which is innately good never goes into the oblivion, never to come back. It's only a temporary state. Proof is throughout existence. You plant the seed, it germinates, it deteriorates, it rots to the point of non-existence, and then it sprouts. You have reforestation. The forest burned down, only to be rejuvenated, that they even grow better than they existed previously. More lush. So it's always a continuous takeaway to this reality that good is meant to be restored. Evil is only there temporarily. So when we say, as I gave an example, when a limb deteriorates and it's beyond rehabilitation, it can never be rehabilitated. That limb becomes non-functional. Regarding the human being and creation, the good, which is the objective, as much as we decline, as much as we deteriorate spiritually, it's always has the ability to come back. It's never at a point of no return. Evil will be at a point of no return at the end of time. Once it goes out of commission, it's dismissed because it's not needed, never to come back. We read in the Tochacha at the end of the book of Leviticus, the curses that God forbid if the Jews don't behave themselves, the level of suffering is unfathomable. And we're going to go into exile. And the Torah says that even in exile, he uses a term, lo ma'astim lo ga'altim. I did not despise them. I did not allow them to be treated as they're putrefied. And the Talmud says that even when we were in exile, God allowed there should be Torah sages to navigate us in exile. That even when the Romans controlled Israel and there were decrees against the study of Torah, against many things, we had Torah leaders that maintained us as a Jewish people. God never allowed us to be in a position where the enemy, which represents evil, was able to obliterate what we are. God was always there for us. As much as it's like a father, as much as a child is delinquent, the father will always love that child. He may be disappointed. He'll do whatever he can to discipline that child, where the discipline is in the best interest of that child, that hopefully when he's disciplined enough, he'll bring him back. The child will appreciate, understand certain things that he didn't appreciate until that discipline, the disciplinary measures have been put in place, whether it's exile, whether it's deprivation, whether it's suffering, whatever it is, doesn't make a difference. The story of Purim, it's Haman, who personified Amalek, comes to Achashverosh, the Persian king who ruled the world supreme. He says, there's this nation here. They're disrespectful, they're defiant, they don't value, and we have to destroy them. annihilated every man, woman, and child. So Ahasuerus took his ring and gave it to Haman. He was the viceroy of the Persian Empire. So the Talmud tells us that the removal of what's the purpose of a prophet? A purpose of prophet is not to introduce new laws. Because after Moshe Rabbeinu, a prophet introduces a new law, he's considered a false prophet. He's there purely for one thing, to admonish the Jews, to get them back on track, to forewarn them that if they continue misbehaving, there are going to be consequences, and try to speak sense into them to behave properly, to be reinstated. Who sends those prophets? God sends the prophets. They're God's agent, but you're already in exile. And he sends the Chachamim to disseminate Torah in exile. What is that supposed to do? It's supposed to open our eyes, give us an appreciation for where we're at. Give you an example. Person, there's a fire, a conflagration. It's 1,000 feet. It's 1,000 feet from your house. When you're in a house, if you don't look out the window, you say, the warmth is phenomenal. It's pleasurable, but you don't realize the fire is getting closer, and it gets close enough, the house goes up in smoke. The house is going to be incinerated, including you inside. So when God brings suffering on the Jewish people, or sends us into exile, and we're deprived of our Judaism, you say, we're free men, In the United States, it's the land of the buffalo. We roam the prairie, free for what? Free to go into the oblivion. We're a free fall. So what we may be experiencing as being whatever we think it is, it's disaster. It's like being warmed by this conflagration, which is getting closer. It's just a question of time before it's over. God sends the Chachamim, the Torah sages, to teach us the text of the Torah, to give us the inside scoop, as they say. What's happening? And when you put on those night glasses, those night goggles, and you have vision even at nighttime, then you see reality. And when you see that reality, you start running in the other direction. You see the minds exactly where they are. You see all the pitfalls. You see all the bear traps. You don't want to get stuck in one of those traps. You don't want to get stuck in that $1 million golf course in a sand trap, where all the so-called who's who play in that golf course. Because these guys, when they go into those traps, they don't come out of those traps. But they eat in kosher style in the country club. Kosher style. God says kosher style is not enough. It has to be the real thing. It has to be kosher. But it's a 5-star restaurant. It's rated in the who's who's. And who's. And when they had cannibals, they also used to rate different cuts of meat. God forbid. This cannibalism. That's not what life's all about. To be a cannibal, to devour meat, let it be animal, not human, God forbid. But that's not what it's about. But they think it is what it's about. Okay? Seeing is not believing. Knowing is believing. If you know what you see, that's believing. But if you don't know what you see, and it's a distortion of reality, years ago, when we grew up, you don't see it today much. There were many children who were cross-eyed. People were cross-eyed. Larry remembers he had many classmates. When they look one direction, they would look the other direction. You understand? You think you look in a certain direction. What you're seeing is not what in the direction you're looking. You're seeing something else. But as much as you have that vision impairment, ultimately can be repaired. Because good could always come back. Evil, once it goes into oblivion, never comes back. And that's the rule of thumb in terms of reality. A Jew never gives up hope. Never. Because everything we believe was given to us at Sinai by God. God says, I will never abandon you. Never abandon us. The Jewish people represent the essence, the core is good. We go astray. But every Jew can be brought back if he chooses to come back. And every Jew has that ability. If he chooses, he can. But why? Because whatever regression we have, it's always could be rehabilitated to come back where you should be. And that's the reality of good versus the reality of evil.